be another like it in any of our lifetimes. Throughout the year, we were guided by our two incredible presidents, Karabo and Connor. Without these two, Surge Soc would quite literally have fallen apart. Although we have had to sacrifice a lot last year, these two people gave so much to our society, and we are so incredibly grateful that words cannot quite capture it. Traditionally, at the year's first event, we honor the previous leadership with small tokens of appreciation. Another sign of how things have changed is the inability to give these to you right now, but hopefully soon you can receive our thanks. I would also like to extend gratitude to Jenna, our previous head of events, and Lexi, our past head of skills. Heading up these two portfolios was no easy feat during such new territory as our society was shifted to the virtual platform. And we are continuously thankful for their dedication to their respective portfolios and the committee as a whole. The Exco of 2021 has big shoes to fill, and we hope to do justice to our committee and our loyal society members. We acknowledge that we do not lead or work in isolation, and we are excited to have the support of an incredible team of committee members to enter into what promises to be another busy and hopefully prosperous year. Now to touch a little bit more on what everyone has come for this evening, our theme for 2021. Confronting contagions. If you aren't 100% sure what this actually means yet, you're definitely not alone. I'm still grappling with it, and I had a hand in coming up with it. Almost exactly a year ago, the first case of COVID-19 arrived on South African shores. And not much later, we watched as our president announced a nationwide lockdown that would go on to last for 5 weeks. A year later, our country has just embarked on what hopes to be a successful vaccination campaign. 2020 turned many of us into self-appointed corona experts. And many of us being health science students were ones that family and friends looked to for advice, despite the fact that many of us knew very little about what it actually was. But as the year drew on, it became evident that 2020 was not just a year that the world would be plagued by the coronavirus. May saw the revival of the Black Lives Movement, and it was evident that it was not only COVID that had infiltrated into many communities, but the ideals of intolerance and racism were still prevalent and possibly even gaining traction. In June, our citizens watched again as our president solemnly announced a second pandemic, this one labeled femicide. And in August, many of us took part in the gender-based violence protests that swept across the country as women pushed to stand in solidarity with their sisters. Then came December, and despite our best efforts to sanitize, social distance, and stay at home, the second wave of cases was announced with the discovery of the new variant, and the country was returned to level 3 lockdown regulations as we welcomed in the new year. There are many things that can't be given exact dates in our timeline of last year, but were prominently highlighted by the circumstances we faced and continue to face as our country battles the virus every day. This includes the disparity in access to resources, most prominently healthcare. While many of us are fortunate enough to have good health and rely on healthcare services minimally, and even be entering into the professions ourselves, a global pandemic would cast a stark light on how much of our population could not access this healthcare when suddenly in need of it. As we thought deeper about this theme, we realized another contagion that seemed to have manifested among us is evident amongst the population of students, and that is mental health, or more importantly, lack thereof. The last contagion that we could identify that is prevalent particularly within the student body and may not have been highlighted by the pandemic, but continues to plague us every year is competition and unhealthy amounts of it. Unfortunately, as students, all studying towards the same goal, we seem to forget that we are not islands and have the mindset that it is us against everyone else. I have very, very briefly mentioned each contagion, and our society is not ignorant to think that we are the first people to be talking about such issues. But we hope to continue these conversations and contextualize them in the world of surgery and health science students throughout our year's events. The next slide is to just quickly introduce the Executive Committee of 2021. You are currently hearing from myself, Amy, as I introduced myself at the beginning. And I'm also very excited to introduce our new Vice President, Chloe, who will be working alongside me this year. And you will now also be hearing briefly from the rest of the Executive Committee on their plans for the year. And I will now hand over to Dominic, our Head of Events. Thank you.
Oh, I'm live. Hello, good evening, everyone. As Amy and the previous slide indicated, I am Dominic Da Costa, the Head of Events for 2021. As Head of Events, I coordinate and oversee the organization of society events. As you know, social distancing has led to a shift in how we host events and interact with our society members, i.e. every one of you watching this evening. However, this shift did not hinder us in 2020, and it certainly will not hinder us this year. We plan to give you the same complement of events as a normal SurgSoc year. So keep an eye out on our socials, which you'll hear more about later, and subscribe to our Telegram channel for more updates. In the next few slides, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what events at SurgSoc are like, if you don't already know, and what we have in the works for 2021. So let's get cracking. We at SurgSoc like to keep some consistency in our events. So some of them are hosted annually, and some annual events are retired or rebooted, but the three on the slides are the annual events that we hosted last year and plan to host this year as well. Oh, I'm getting notifications. The burnout panel.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Just this slide, the slides are blocked by the pop-up window.
Oh, oops, sorry. That was an unintended side effect. Hopefully everyone can see the slides now. Let's continue. The burnout panel. This is a panel discussion about mental health among healthcare professionals and medical students. On this panel, we discuss topics like what is burnout, what are the signs, how do we prevent it, and what are people's experiences of it. Next, we have Women in Medicine. This is another panel discussion that we host in partnership with other societies like PATH and PhysSoc, as well as Friends of MSF, to discuss the experiences of women in healthcare, where we started, how far we've come, and where we hope, or I should rather say, must be. Then we have the Great Debate, arguably one of our most enduring and most popular annual events. The Great Debates see surgeons from different specialities making their case on why their speciality is the best. Points are made, minds are blown, and shots are fired. By the end of this event, the votes are counted and the speciality is crowned the year's speciality supreme. Next, we have our past events and lecture series. On the slide, there are posters from events that we still managed to host despite despite the world being on fire in 2020. Lecture series are events that center around a particular topic where we invite an expert to give a lecture or presentation. These lecture series cover a large breadth of specialities and topics, and unlike normal lectures, they won't put you to sleep, and the content is not examinable. Even though we'd love to have as many events as we'd like, there are limits, even for SurgSoc. However, that doesn't mean that we can't think big. On this slide that I've compiled a list of potential lecture series topics that we want to make happen. Some may happen this year, some next year, some may even be scrapped. I guess you'll just have to wait and see. But let's have a look at them anyway. We have scrubs and sanitizers, keeping clean in the OR, surgical cyborgs, robots in the OR, who's who in the OR zoo, what makes up a surgical team. If the scrub don't fit, you must acquit. An introduction to surgical law. That's so niche. A look into peculiar procedures. And lastly, but certainly not least, underprivileged and under the knife. An introduction to access in surgery. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of this event, and I hope you join us for the next one. I'll now give it to our 2021 Head of Skills, Malcolm. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Dominique, and good evening to everyone. So as mentioned, my name is Malcolm, and I'm the head of the Skills Division for 2021. I'm involved in coordinating the skills workshops that our society holds and working alongside our team we look to bring you much fun and engagement in our workshops. So let us go into what skills you can expect SurgSoc to hold going forward this year. So you just change the slide, please, Tom. To the next one. Okay. To begin with, we are happy to announce that we'll be back on campus at Medical School to bring you all our suturing workshops, both our basic and advanced suturing workshops. We plan to host multiple basic and advanced workshops throughout the year, and are excited to see you all in person. Our basic workshops will aim to mainly introduce attendees to suturing techniques, different equipment used in suturing, and as well as exciting information surrounding this skill. And moving onward to our advanced workshops, we'll be building on the techniques and training that were taught in the basic suturing workshops. Although it is not completely necessary for you to have attended the basic ones before the advanced, it is highly recommended as most of the things taught will be explained further or gone into more detail in our advanced suturing workshops. So now, importantly, a question I'm sure is on everyone else's mind is, how will we be doing this with COVID-19 and all the regulations put in place? So we're also happy to announce that we have new revamped facilities which will be holding all our suturing workshops in. They are bigger and can accommodate for all the necessary requirements. There's adequate hand washing stations as well as the disinfectants and other materials needed. Of course, the responsibility is also on us as teachers of the suturing workshops and as you as the attendees to wear masks and screen before entering campus. And we have to restrict the amount of attendees, but we can still host as much as 16 to 18 attendees per workshop. And that's something very important for this year. So we are thrilled to be back in person and hope to see you all at our workshops, whether it be just for fun or for your learning and improvement of your suturing skills. I'll now give the floor to Anri, our head of outreach.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Anri Smith, and I'm the head of outreach for 2021. So just to tell you a little bit about the portfolio. So the outreach portfolio is a platform by which we infiltrate our communities and try to make a tangible difference in the lives of others. The portfolio represents an intersection between community upliftment and empowerment and our commitment to represent the spirit of giving back. What I do as head of outreach is I coordinate and I manage outreach events, arrange sponsorships where needed, and head up projects and campaigns dedicated to specific NGOs, NPOs, or charities. And so one of the first drives of the year is the Easter egg drive. The Easter egg drive runs throughout March, during which we collect Easter eggs from students in the Faculty of Health Sciences. And we have currently stationed a box in the clinical skills unit on the third floor of med school. And students are urged to make donations. And by donating, students will also be entered into a draw in which 2 lucky winners will be able to win a pair of scrubs. And these will be sponsored by either the Smile Foundation or Surgeons for Little Lives. And the eggs will be handed out to children in the pediatric wards at Baragwanath Hospital and the small wards at CMJH during the week of the 5th of April. And we're very excited for that. And so now moving on to our school outreach. Our school outreaches involve members of our committee going to neighboring high schools to give grade 10, 11, and 12 students short tutorials concerning a specific topic. Examples of topics include what X-rays are, how to measure your blood pressure, how to put on sterile gloves and a surgical gown, etc. Last year, because of COVID, we were unable to have any of our school outreaches as per usual, but instead, our 2020 head of outreach created a WhatsApp tutoring program where members of our committee and some volunteers from the Faculty of Health Sciences assisted grade 10, 11, and 12 students in preparing for their exams. And since school students spent a large proportion of 2020 self-studying, this was a terrific initiative and an enormous success. So moving on now to Mandela Day. So Mandela Day is usually one of the highlights of our outreach portfolio. And last year, it was challenging to orchestrate a socially distanced activity for Mandela Day, but we came up with the idea of having a Parktown cleanup. We spent 67 minutes on Mandela Day collecting garbage in and around Med School, and we were able to fill several bags. And this year, we intend on having another Parktown cleanup, but in addition, we intend to have a socially distanced Make a Sandwich Day at Med School. The sandwiches will be distributed to nearby shelters by our team. We also intend to dedicate the month of July to collect blankets and toys for children in the Smile wards at CMJH and the pediatric wards at Baragwanath Hospital. And now finally, Women's Month. So Women's Month is another exciting time in the outreach portfolio. Last year, the team leaders for Women's Month had a month-long fundraiser campaign called She Matters. And this was dedicated to the Maize Women's Shelter. Some of the women were actually interviewed and their stories created an overwhelming response. And some of the pictures are shown at the bottom of this slide. The team raised an incredible 11,000 Rand through social media and using the BackaBuddy website. And this year we intend on holding another month-long campaign for Women's Month, during which we hope to not only achieve the same goal or surpass it, but we would also like to partner with Pay It Forward, a community organization that collects old clothes to give to the less fortunate. So I'll give it over to Nompumelelo now, our Head of Public Relations.
Good evening to our panel and fellow students. Welcome to our launch. It is an honor and a privilege to have you all join us tonight. My name is Nompumelelo, the Head of Public Relations, as initially introduced. You're possibly wondering, what is public relations? What is the role played for this portfolio? Well, public relations is a new portfolio in our society. It is not only a portfolio that manages our social pages, but it has created a voice and an image to who we are and what it is we do as a society. This portfolio represents the state of the relationship between us and our supporters, who comprise of the students who attend our events, our speakers, the faculty, and our sponsors. What I do as head of this portfolio is contribute not only in managing the release and spread of information, but my duty is to contribute in building and maintaining a positive public image that increases the awareness of our society and shapes public opinion for the better. Tonight, I'll be giving a brief overview of work done in the past couple of years and possible plans in the near future that I would like to carry out on our socials. To keep interacting with our virtual family outside of our informative events, we had some fun on our platform last year. Lockdown has a way of drawing our creativity, especially when physical interactive activity is so limited. And some of the things we did was run the Scrub Challenge. We had our informative COVID updates, which was a way to improve our interaction with our virtual family. The Scrub Challenge involved having people doing creative acts while in their scrubs. This was the best way to take a break from everything like studying and actually win yourself a pair of scrubs for just being yourself. The response from our viewers was great, and we intend to have more of those challenges in the course of this year. We then did the Jerusalem Challenge that had the most parts of South Africa, actually the world, participating in it. These are some snippets from the video. You can watch the whole video on our Instagram page. This activity allowed us to step out of our comfort zone and participate in a challenge that made us feel united. Some of the plans that I have for the future, this slide will outline some of the big public holidays we intend in making awareness on. There are great holidays that have a history we all can learn about and see what changes or progress we are currently making as the world, but especially as South Africa. Things like Human Rights Day, things that we could ask ourselves, what rights do we have? And do we recognize the responsibilities that come with those rights? the Freedom Day to outline how free we really are, Youth Day to outline the power the youth has in reconstructing the narrative of our country, and so on. More information will be sent out to the team with regards to how we will run this advertising. I would also like to create more interactions and get more opinions from you guys on our social media by having more Q&As, running polls, and just to get us all thinking about what changes still need to be made. Some other events that I'd like to celebrate are Family and International Workers' Day. I do believe there's always a lot to be grateful for and a lot to celebrate, and these are some of the basic ideas. Of course, some of these events and some of these posts are subject to change, but most likely all of these will be carried out through the course of this year. And the best way for you to stay on the loop and updated, please follow us on Instagram and Facebook, like, share, and comment on our posts. You can also contact us through our email at witssurgicalsociety@gmail.com. And last but not least, don't forget to turn on post notifications. Last but not least, tonight we are also launching our website. So if you are interested in finding out about who we are, what we are involved in, and also get access to our annual newsletter, please use this link that will be available on our socials and navigate through the website. It will give you a detailed outline of what's happening and what we're all about. Thank you so much for your time. Stay tuned and please enjoy the rest of this event.
Okay, perfect. So thank you to the Exco for laying out their plans. I hope that you guys are all as excited for the year as we are. We will now be moving on to the panel discussion, where we will be grappling with the theme in a little bit more detail and what it means in our context. I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our four amazing panelists for the evening, who will each be very loosely representing different contagions. First up, we have a very familiar face, at least for the GEMP students, and that is Dr. Lautenberg. Dr. Lautenberg will be helping us chat about mental health tonight. She is currently working as a clinical skills lecturer at UMI and also functions as the mental health liaison in the department when needed. Dr. Lautenberg has a background in mental health and health science education, having completed her diploma in mental health in 2019 and a postgraduate diploma in mental science education in 2020. Next is Ravimbo Chiswa. Ravimbo is currently a GEMP 4 student and soon to be doctor at WITS and also was the head of Surge Psych Outreach Portfolio in 2019. She is a passionate student and all-round amazing person who has been and is still involved in many initiatives in her medical career thus far. She is passionate about women empowerment and community upliftment, and tonight she will be taking on the contagion of intolerance. Then is Dr. Kawanga. Dr. Kawanga is a public health medicine specialist in the Department of Community Health at Charlotte Maxeke Hospital, Johannesburg Academic Hospital and the Wits School of Public Health. She works with the health officials at national, provincial, and district levels on developing policy, as well as assessing, planning, and delivering health services. She is academic coordinator for GEMP teaching at the Wits School of Public Health and teaches and supervises masters and doctoral students. She has research interests in reproductive health, integration of health systems, and health systems strengthening. Dr. Kawanga has been invited to help us talk about access to healthcare and poverty. And finally is Dr. Temlet. Dr. Temlet will be helping us deal with the contagion of success and competition. She currently works as an associate lecturer in sessional capacity for the University of Wits, and she is a former medical officer at the internal medicine departments at Charlotte and Barra, where she was part of the emergency department multidisciplinary team that was assembled to combat COVID-19. Dr. Temlet is also a Surge Psych alumni and was most notably part of the committee that brought about the first Great Debates and the inaugural South African Student Surgical Society Symposium. Before we get started, I would like to encourage all of our viewers tonight to please log on to the Menti site that we have set up. So all you have to do is simply enter in this website address, www.menti.com, and then use the code that is shown on the screen. So you enter in this code, and then you'll be able to interact and answer the 2 questions that we have set up. And and this way you can live partake in our discussion. Towards the end of the evening or towards the end of the discussion, we will have a look at your responses and discuss them in further detail with the panelists. So without further ado, we're going to start with the first question we have for our panelists this evening. I would like again to encourage everyone to go onto the Menti site and interact with us, but also please feel free to type questions into our Q&A chat box if anything specific comes to mind, or if you have any specific questions for our panelists. Cool, so we'll get started. If the panelists can just turn their cameras on, that would be great, thank you. Okay, we're just waiting for Dr. Temlett.
Sorry, Amy, I think the host stopped my video. Please would you start it for me?
Oh, I'm not the host. Dom, if you could try sort that out.
One moment.
I'm not sure why that is.
Okie dokie. Is that working? Awesome.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So the first few questions that we have, obviously we want to see why the contagions that we've invited you to speak on sort of interlink and all really mold together. So just to sort of kick us off, I think the first question that we sort of prepared was what your specific experiences have been with each contagion, and why you think contagion or contagious is an apt word for it.
I think if I can speak from my personal experience, if we start with something that actually really struck a chord with me, was this competition thing that happens with med students. And I remember it from when I was a medical student, and the friends above me, Dr. Pattinson and Dr. Pieterse, we all studied together, and it's something we constantly talk about how you guys should actually be each other's best friends. We should be our own best friends, because when it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you can't drip a baby that's been crying for 15 minutes, it's the intern on call with you that you need to phone and ask for help. But for some reason that's lost with our students now. And I think it's so sad, because you guys are sometimes the only one who knows what each other's going through. And you should be each other's greatest support and greatest friends in this experience, this journey that you are taking into your career. And somehow med school, it like squashes that. And it really makes me very sad, because that perspective comes a little bit later in your life. And sometimes those good friends you could have made in varsity have been lost now because of this need to be better than everybody that you study with. And it's just really sad. So, and I think that greatly affects your mental health as a student, constantly feeling like you are fighting against each other. Everyone's doing better than you. You have to spend more time studying because this person is getting 90% and you're not. And I think if as a group of medical students, everyone was more supportive of each other, I think people would suffer less from this extreme burnout and fatigue that happens, because I think it comes from a large part with competing with each other. So that's something that just really struck a chord with me.
I would also like to just speak, well, going off what Dr. Lassenbach was saying, that I think it's very much something we've inherited over the years, and it's been this toxic culture that we've perpetuated. It's something that started out because it was convenient for our consultants or the consultants who have retired to be that way. And now we have just continued to perpetuate it, and it's not healthy for us, and it's not serving us, and it's not serving our patients. And when you speak about what is your common goal, I think, Dom, actually was speaking about, what is your same goal? Well, what is your goal? Is your goal an MBBCH degree, or is your goal to be a holistic doctor who forms part of a good team who looks after a patient? And I think you need to start shifting your goal. And once you've shifted your goal, you'll realize that it takes a team. It never will take one doctor. It takes nurses, it takes radiologists, it takes lab technicians. It takes everybody to get a patient in those doors and out. And I think we need to start pushing back against this inherited toxic culture and actually just say, just because you went through it, it's not a good enough answer for why we should continue letting juniors go through it. And it starts actually from us that are already qualified to say, no, the students are not going to do that, or the interns are not going to do that, just because we were put through that. And I think that's what we need to fight back against, is that inherited toxic environment.
I was just going to say, as a student myself, I think that's such an important, conversation that we need to have as a student body. And, I always try to grapple with where I think this stems from. And I think it stems from the fact that it's all these super smart people who have been applauded and awarded throughout their high school careers. People are always looking at them, they're in their newspaper, they're top duck scholar, like everybody knows you. And then you kind of come into the space where there's 200 and something other people who are equally as smart, if not even better. And now you're trying to find ways of this inherent thing that you already have that has been building since you were in high school. You're trying to find ways to be special again. I think that's where it comes from a little bit. Trying to find ways to stand out again. So you want to do better. If you think if you hide this information from person X, then you're going to get a higher mark, or you're going to get the well done in clinical skills today because you knew this information that someone else didn't, or in the ward round, you're going to stand out because you answered the question and you had this secret resource that everybody else didn't have. And I think, in me trying to grapple with where this comes from, that's one of the reasons, is that people are always trying to find validation in a space that often doesn't validate you. It's very rare that as students were being told, oh, well done for dripping that patient. Maybe a very nice intern will tell you that, or maybe the clinical skills tutors, will always tell you well done. But when you're in the actual clinical space, it's very rare that someone in a ward round will even say, oh, well done for knowing that, or well done for clocking that patient. And because we're not often validated in that space, I think we always go around looking for validation, which I think I've had to come to a place in this final year where I've realized that I actually have to validate myself internally. So at the end of each day, I kind of come home and I say, what do I think I did well today? No one might have told me I clocked that patient well. So that was a really tough psych patient that I clocked, and I think I did that quite well. Well done to myself. No one's going to tell me that, right? But if I look for validation in that space, I'm going to end up backstabbing, keeping information from others, not wanting people to have access to certain things, as if it makes my mark any better, which it doesn't. But you could argue with Cohen that it could. But, in general, it doesn't make your mark any better. And when you realize that, when you study with other people, when you're working with other people, that's the only way you get ahead. I think then that mentality starts to fall away as a student. I don't know.
Ravimbo, I definitely agree with you. And the thing is, it's so hard, especially now with the pandemic and what it's done to everybody's own mental health. The students were kept at home for a very long time, and you guys you had to study, you had to deal with coursework in a completely different way. It was something that you guys you'd never had to do it like that before. And I think when you become so competitive and you seek this validation in the only way that us as medical students and medical doctors know how, you land up isolating yourself even more. And it's been during this time, at least, I think, where everyone's needed each other so much more than we probably ever have. But all of the doctors in the hospital are frontline healthcare workers. If it's not for their team that they work in, they wouldn't be able to do it alone. And I think it's so funny how we're so focused on getting the highest marks and clocking the patient the best and, being the person who gets to cut out the appendix, that you forget how much you need your friends to actually keep you sane. I need to be able to phone you and say, oh my goodness, this patient died today and I don't know how to deal with that. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know who to debrief to. And instead of opening up those channels and making more space, what lands up happening is you just isolate yourself more and more. And we land up building our own toxicity because it's the only thing that almost keeps us comforted. And it's just it's so unreal that that's happening in a time where we've actually needed each other and asked the support of our classmates and our colleagues and our peers more than we ever have.
And I just wanted to pick up on what you've said there. I think that's so important because often doctors, medical students, people in this field put up this front that they're fine, that they don't need help, that they are completely competent on their own. And often it's the furthest thing from the truth, but people are so concerned about how they'll be perceived, that there's this weakness if you need help, that if you need to just express how you're feeling, if a death of a patient or a child or, a surgery didn't go well, that it affects you as a human being. And that's a good thing. And it's been so demonized over the years that having feelings is a bad thing. It's not. Being a doctor who has empathy, who has a heart, who has feelings, who can speak to the patient, who can understand the patient's experience, that understand your colleague's experience, is a gift. It's what sets you apart in this field from others. And it's what builds your passion. And I think we have almost sabotaged ourselves by saying, I'm fine, everything's fine. And you don't want to let that guard down. But actually, if you do let it down, you realize that more people are actually not fine. And if you were just allowed yourself to be vulnerable with each other, instead of, someone comes to you and says, I'm really struggling on this call, or like you said, I'm really struggling to drip this baby, or I'm really struggling with this section of work. If we were rather more helpful to each other instead of critical, we learned this like 3 weeks ago. Why are you coming now that you don't understand it? It's kind of it's the words and the terminology and the way you speak to each other that we need to start changing, because everybody is not okay. And the sooner that we start to realize that, and we start to actually say, I'm not okay, you're not okay, and we're coming from a similar place, instead of being so critical, we'll do a lot better as an entire field.
I just want to just chime in a little bit there. Just listening to you talk about your the experiences as students, it's a few years back for me, but I think those experiences are definitely carried on into the workspace in some ways. And I think as students, being vulnerable and learning that sort of being, the ability to be vulnerable and then learn from the experiences so that you become a better person. I think it's something that one can then translate into their workspace when they start working as doctors. And something that Dr. Temlett said just now about vulnerability is so important, because I think it's when doctors, medical students who later become doctors, understand their vulnerabilities and understand that they're not infallible, and understand that actually health and the creation of health requires more than a doctor, but it's, as you guys have been saying, it's actually a team effort. And it's not taking away from you, but it's actually building. And it's that team spirit and teamwork that is absolutely essential in the work that I do in public health, where we as public health specialists who are doctors often have to just acknowledge that, we're actually vulnerable here. And there's certain things like, we'll be talking later about poverty and access to healthcare. Those are things that we have no control over. Because a lot of it rests in other sections of society. It's the economic development that creates jobs. It's transport that provides cheap transport for people to get to healthcare services. It's employers who give their workers opportunities to take time off so that they can go and seek healthcare. So it's all those things that we have no influence over, but it's only when we sort of sit back and say, okay, we can't do this on our own, that then we are able to make a bit of an impact in terms of the contagion that I'm talking about today, which is poverty, and the fact that poverty is a big factor in reducing access to healthcare. So I just use that as a segue to sort of come in and talk about it. Starts with a little bit with self-reflection and being vulnerable enough to recognize that you do have some weaknesses or rather blind spots, and other people can help you figure your way forward. I'll say a little bit more about poverty perhaps when we move on to. A bit later. I was wondering if this theme is still following on around the mental health issues.
Well, Dr. Kawanga, we can definitely speak about poverty now. It's just, we'd really like to see how everything, interlinks. And I think you found quite a nice link there. I think just one of the big things as a student personally for me that I often face is the question of, well, what can I do about it now? And I think all of you doctors have said, given some advice about what students can start to do to start breaking these sort of chains and cycles of things. But my train of thought just went. But yeah, so I think one of the big questions that students face a lot of the time is, what can we do about it now? Because I think, procrastination is a very common thing. And often we think, oh, I'll start it on Monday. And the same thing goes for these kinds of contagions and stuff like that. We go, oh, well, I'll sort it out once I've graduated, and I'll sort it out at another time, or at the start of the new year, I'll have a New Year's resolution and I'll get my mental health right then, or I'll start an initiative, I'll join a plan, I'll make a group circle with friends, and I'll do it then, because Monday or a new year or, a new time, a new space in your life always seems like a better plan. But what can we do now as a student to start confronting these contagions, if that makes sense?
Yeah,
I'd just like to say, pick up your phone. Oh, sorry. Was that a directed question?
No, sorry, it wasn't a directive question, but I think it links to both, definitely to mental health, and then also to Dr. Kawanga about the cycle of poverty and access to healthcare. I think that's a very prevalent thing. But if we want to speak about just how we can talk about mental health and breaking the unhealthy competition among students first, and then we can speak about poverty.
Okay, so I think my kind of quick response to that would be, do it now. Pick up your phone right now and text your friend. Text somebody who's made a difference. Text somebody who you know is having a hard time. Everybody who's watching knows that there's someone who tonight is struggling with a section of work, or who is trying to get through a call at the hospital, or who's done really something cool this week, like something amazing, and they've gone through something important or something big in their lives. And it's those small things. It doesn't need to be a huge act where you change your whole life. It's those little things where you send somebody a small message and just say, you know what, you did really good today. Like the way you presented that patient, or the way that you did that, or I really learned something from you, amongst yourselves, and validating each other is where you start. And from there, you can build on it, because that will change the dynamic of the network that you interact with. And that will attract the right people to you and will make you feel more robust in your place in this society and in this profession. So do it now, like right now, whilst you're watching this. Say to your friend, like Dom, who is hosting this, Dom, you've done such a great job doing this. Like, you have 6 days until your first test. And I mean, you have probably had sleepless nights over this, but how cool. You got this panel together. You got these people talking about really prevalent things. And like, well done, Dom. Like, I think that's awesome of you. And it's as simple as that.
I definitely agree with you. I think we're just so hesitant sometimes to praise others, especially the people who we love and our friends. And if you don't start understanding that you each of you individually, all of us, not just the students, but all medical professionals, it has to start today. And the more you do it to others, the more others are going to respond positively to your change. If you heard about a past paper, don't be that guy who holds on to the past paper. Message one of your friends and be like, hey man, here's the past paper. Who knows if it's going to help? But because that's what our group of friends in varsity started doing. And next thing, the whole class had the past paper because one dude was nice enough to send it to everyone. And it was just so nice to realize that some guy I think I'd met once in the whole 6 years of my medical studies, somehow his past paper wombled its way over to me. And all of a sudden, it wasn't this, he wants to do better than everybody else. We're all going to try and do as best as we can with the information that we're given. And I think it has to start with, if it starts with one person, one group of friends, you know, one society, that's going to be where the difference comes from. But it's hard. It's hard sometimes. Realistically speaking, it's hard to see other people succeed sometimes. It's hard to see people do better than us. It's hard to accept that I'm not the best at everything I do. Like Ravimbo said, like, we've all come from backgrounds where we were the tops of our classes. It's hard to accept that maybe I'm in the middle now, or like maybe I'm closer to the bottom. And if I share this, I'm going to push that divide from where I am so much higher up. But that becomes an introspective thing where you have to actively go out of your way and make a decision and say that stuff doesn't matter. You have to pass, you have to get through med school. But the intention is not for you to get 98% or cum your degree. The intention is to be a good, kind healthcare practitioner who's going to make a difference to the community who's around you. And you can only do that with a good group of friends and colleagues there to support you. And if you have this closed off, I must be better than everybody else attitude, you're not going to be that kind of healthcare practitioner, because we can't do this alone. Like Dr. Chawanga says, there's just so much we can't change that we have to start working on what we can change. And that has to be done last night and yesterday. But we can't fix that, so we can do it today and tomorrow.
Just to segue back to the success part of that, I think how success is shared, for you were speaking about your class, some of you might have come across some notes by a guy in my class, Ahmed Baidat, and he put together a Dropbox. And, you know, Ahmed's notes are still doing the rounds, and he started it for our class and he started it for us. And we loved his notes and we love him as a person, and he's doing psychiatry and we're doing internal medicine or surgery. But it got us through, and it's getting other years through. And I think you leave a legacy sometimes and you don't even realize it. He could never have known that the night he made that Dropbox that, you know, 10 years down the line, it's just 9 years down the line, kids are going to be using those same notes cramming before the test. And it's just about paying it forward. And I think when you are successful, you will beget more success as you help others to succeed. And I think that's very much a common thread that we need to remember. So I love what you said about helping out your classmates. And yeah, I could see some of you, remember you nodding, you've seen those notes, you know what I'm talking about.
Yep, still use them to this day.
So, I mean, I think what you guys have been talking about, it sort of resonates very much in terms of the question you're asking, what can medical students do? So you were sort of, you know, I think it was Dr. Loschenberg was saying, do something now, and you know, and Dr. Temmet was saying, pick up the phone today, call your friend. You know, so it's the same with addressing any issues that we identify that we think are a concern and require some attention. And I mean, poverty is huge, and I mean, as I said earlier, the thing about poverty is, I think sometimes people feel there's nothing I can do, because we view it as this big abstract issue that's beyond me and there's nothing I can do, and you know, let me not even try and just sit back. And I think one of the things, a number of things I've learned in my journey as a medic and a public health practitioner is sometimes it's useful to break it down into, you know, what are the things about poverty that are within my sphere of influence or control, and maybe let me focus on those. And I mean, the same applies to the question you asked about, you know, poverty does have an impact on access to healthcare. We know that people with lower income because often that's one of the ways in which one makes poverty tangible, is to look at income. How much income does someone earn? So people with lower income often have less access to healthcare, and the pathways through which they have less access to healthcare might be, lower income means they probably didn't have a good education, they probably don't have a job, and therefore the ability to actually get to understand that they need to seek care is less than if somebody is more educated or has a higher income, etc. So there are certain pathways through which it happens. And it's sometimes by understanding those pathways and trying to unpack them that one sort of breaks poverty down from this big thing to, oh, it's a lack of transport to get to a health facility, actually. Or it's actually the fact that someone needs to go to a clinic to get medication, but the clinics are only open Monday to Friday. And if they were open on Saturday and Sunday, then maybe that person would be able to get their medication more regularly and they wouldn't default. And so it's about unpacking and finding what is it that is actually a big issue that perhaps a medical student or a doctor or a health system in this regard where I work can have some influence. And I know, medical students often, when we teach about social determinants of health, which are the social conditions that influence people's ability to, Ruvimbo, I'm sure you've recently had those lectures. They probably think, oh, what's this got to do with me? But it's actually those little things that one can make a difference in. And so I mean, I was listening to the introduction when the various portfolio holders were speaking about the activities that they're doing. And I know, some of them seem like little things, like feeding a person or providing a gift to somebody to uplift their spirits. That has impact on mental health. That has impact on well-being, which is, it's not about treating a disease or getting them out of their poverty, but it's making a difference to people's lives. And so some of those things they're small, but they're things that students can do. And I really applaud you for doing those kinds of things. The bigger poverty issues, yes, those require government, private sector, unions, all sorts of people to deal with. But I think on a day-to-day basis, it's about unpacking what are those issues. And so for me in the health sector, what I learned was, look at the things that you think you can influence. So like I was talking about just now, the health sector is able to influence things by making health services free at the first port of call. That's a way of people not having to pay for healthcare. The health sector has done things like not requiring people to pay when they're referred to hospital if they are below a certain income bracket, for example. And so that's not addressing the poverty, because that's too big an issue to address. But it's about addressing the things that the health system has control over to make it a little bit easier for people to be able to access care so that they have a fair chance of being healthy. So it's not fair for me, Mary Kawonga, for example, if, it's not fair for me, Mary Kawonga, who earns a certain income, to have greater access to a cardiologist if I have a heart condition than my domestic worker, for example. So so addressing poverty and the inequalities in access to healthcare is not so much about addressing the poverty. It's about taking your gaze a little bit from the poverty to sort of say, let me look at the things that I can influence. So in terms of an equal access to care, how can I, as a medic or who's contributing to the health system and how it's being designed, ensure that the way the health system is designed makes sure that Jane, my domestic worker, also can see a cardiologist. So even if she's living 200 k's away from the hospital where there's a cardiologist, it's about making a plan to get her there. So I can get into my car, very nice, get my petrol, and I'm there in 5 minutes, but it's not the same for her. So it's about looking at what are the tangible things that one can change. And those things might be different for different people depending on the settings where they're working. And I know as medical students, perhaps one can't do something directly, but one can start to understand how poverty affects access to healthcare, what are those different pathways, and how can I, as a doctor, perhaps start holding people accountable to make sure that these things are actually put in place and the Constitution actually says they should be happening. So I think those are the little ways in which medical students can start, by sort of familiarizing yourself, understanding what the issues are, and then sort of thinking, who are the organizations working on these issues? How can our voices add to their voices? to lobby government or to advocate, to MPs in my local area or whatever the issues might be. So I think for me, that's the way I would see it. And so there was another question around if it was access to education. For example, the unequal access to education at varsity, etc. Well, it's the same principle. It's about looking not at the poverty, but at the pathways through which reduced access leads to poorer health outcomes or educational outcomes for people. So those are just a few of my suggestions on that.
I think that's so true, Dr. Kaonga. As medical students, it sometimes can feel like you're saying, Amy, that this is so beyond us. How can we help? This is so overwhelming. We're out of our depth. But like Dr. Kaonga is saying, it's about identifying the small tangible things that you can do in your space. So for me, for example, and for my colleagues in the clinical space, it's something as simple as remembering that each patient needs to have their dignity preserved no matter where they're seeking their healthcare. So even though we're at Barra and sometimes there's no curtain, just the simple thing of you, when you're told to go clock that patient, trying to find that curtain, trying to find a way to cover the patient when you're about to examine them, introducing yourself. It's things that were taught in med school, but you might forget. You've been told you have to clock this patient, it's lunchtime, you have 30 minutes, you might just get there and start, But it's simple things, drawing the curtain, introducing yourself. Those small things, identifying ways that you can preserve patients' dignity in the space, identifying ways that we can advocate for our patients, asking the registrar, so why is there no hot water in the showers today? One day I asked, so why is there no hot water in the showers? And then I was given some long-winded answer, but it was just that conversation that we had with him, and then the conversation was able to escalate to other people. So it's about identifying the small ways in the ward that you can do that. And I think the social determinants of health lecture that I still remember became more tangible in the clinical space because you were able to see that the patient in cubicle A with, let's say, a liver mass, and the patient in cubicle B with a liver mass, they might have the exact same mass, but the way that that disease plays out in their lives is so completely different. That's one of the things we were really able to see when you're in the clinical space. But that man over there, he might be middle income, have a lot of social support, have a car. So after this, he's going to be able to follow up at this local clinic very easily and have access to his medication. He has people visiting him, small things like that, in comparison to the man in cubicle B, who might be of a lower socioeconomic standing, might not be able to easily follow up at his clinic, might be, living in an area where, it's difficult for him to access health. And all those things, those social determinants of health become so much more tangible in the clinical space when you realize how the disease, the person behind the disease, essentially, the person behind the disease and how their life and all these social factors actually play out on their course in the clinical space.
So I just wanted to pick up on something, just a practical thing. You were saying, what can you do now? And I'm more of an internal medicine person, so I'm a little bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing here at a surgical society event. But things like understanding that patients are going to have multiple follow-up clinics. So maybe they have to come and see the cardiologist and they need to come to diabetic clinic. Try and understand, when is that going to be? Try and not make that follow-up as you become interns the day after each other, or 2 days in the same week that's at the end of the month. They're not going to be able to afford that. And you have to just start to understand that people live and people come and exist as your patients in their own social environment. But we often make that worse because we're like, oh, well, we only have clinic on a Tuesday, so you can only come on a Tuesday. And you actually need to just see that this person is now making like 4 trips with different taxis to try and get to you twice in 1 week, whereas you could have just actually made it either on the same day that they could come and collect the medication. Just those little things that can make a huge difference to that person's life. And the other thing I wanted to just pick up on is what you're already doing with the tutoring and the outreach that you did last year with the grade 10s, 11s, and 12s. And you are helping kids that might not have 200 Rand an hour to pay a private tutor. And you have your skills, and your skills that you have now that you have acquired getting through high school, getting into medicine, getting to final year, those skills are useful and are of value to somebody who doesn't yet have them. So use those skills now. work in those outreach programs, help the kids at those high schools so that their parents don't have to spend that money on tutors and accessing education and getting help with subjects that they could then do very well in and could help them to further their own studies in whatever field they want to do. So you are already doing it. You do already have platforms where you are doing it, just as Dr. Kawanga said, you know, the feeding schemes, etc. And don't sell yourself short. You're already helping in that way. And as you come into the space as doctors and as interns, just be mindful of where you could save patients money and save them a trip. For example, when I did oncology, patients didn't know that they could catch the transport from Baragwanath to Charlotte Maxeke, where obviously that's the only oncology unit. So they were catching multiple transports, private transports, where they could have actually just gone to Barra and caught the hospital transport to come for their radiation or their chemo in 2 days of a week. So also make yourself aware of those kind of systems within your own hospital so that you can equip your patients with that information. Because something for you that might seem like it's common knowledge for them, they have no idea about. So I think
Sorry, guys, I think my internet connection is not great, but I want to add something to what's been said as well. Is we often tend to undervalue what validating a human being can do for their self-esteem, for their mental health, for so many different facets of who that person is. And by making time to make someone a sandwich, to tutor kids whose parents can't afford it, to take some time to talk to a patient because the doctor was too busy and the doctor didn't spend enough time explaining to the patient what their condition is. By doing those things, you validate a human being who has previously felt unvalidated. You've made somebody feel like they are worth something. They are not just occupying space. They are not a waste of space to society, and they are not, you know, ruining everybody's day because the nurse was angry, because they're short-staffed, and the doctor's angry because someone got COVID and they can't work now. And we are only human. So we can't weed out those parts of us because we all get angry, we all get frustrated, we all get stressed, we all get sad. And to take away those emotions, we become robots, and you can't expect people to live like that, because if that's what medicine is, then I don't want any part of that. But by taking the time, and it's students often who make profound difference in patients' lives, because you stop and a patient doesn't understand a word that was said on the ward round, and you stop and you explain that to the patient. And now you've given them agency in their own health that perhaps somebody else was not capable of doing for their own personal reasons. And so I think students, I think it's our fault also. I wasn't always the friendliest intern. When I was post-call, a look could kill somebody at 10 paces. If you asked me for something and I was leaving the hospital, it didn't always end well, because you are also only human, and working 30 hours makes you times. But the time I took to actually explain to a student something and validate their presence is what you can do to a patient. It's what you can do for a human or family member. And you guys, we don't value that enough in you, and therefore you don't value the role that you play in healthcare. It's all a community of practice, and as you learn and become bigger, there's so much you guys add, you just don't see it yet. But you can't forget the role that you play, and the huge difference that you make in patients' lives by taking the moment that not all doctors or nurses or physios or OTs have. You validate people, and that is sometimes the biggest change you can make to a human on that day. And I think that's something you guys must most definitely not forget about.
Yes, preach. I agree with that 100%.
I think we're just, as doctors, it's so tough, because I tried my best to be the best that I could possibly be, but my mental health greatly suffered, and my community service year was really hard, and it took my love of medicine away, because I became the doctor I promised I would never be. And I took that out on the staff I worked with. I took that out on my family and my friends. I took that out on my husband. I took that out on my patients. And going from this, I have time to talk to you and explain to you what's going on, I switched over to this, I've got no time to do anything because I don't have time to eat my own lunch or go to the toilet. So your problems can't be as big as my problems are. And because we take out that attitude, not all of us, some of us, we all have bad days, but when we take that attitude out on our students, we also encourage you guys to behave in that way, because it's okay. We're role modeling bad behavior for you. And if your big boss is doing it and the next big boss is doing it and the ComServe and the intern are doing it, then I will succeed by adopting that behavior as well. But I think something so important to remember is you are a human being. Your mental health is going to sometimes take a knock because you can't do everything and be everything to everybody. You have to try very hard to not let what you see other people, you have to remind yourself that that's not the best behavior. That's not what we taught you. So you have to work hard to fight that. It's not always easy.
Lots of words of wisdom, I think. Sorry, I just wanted to agree with what's being said. And I think a session like this must be really valuable to people who are listening, because I mean, it is actually, because many of us, when we trained, we never had this kind of opportunity where people who graduated and are able to give back and say, these are the things. And I think this is the best time while you're a student to do the things that, to change, or to think about how you can change, or think about how you can be a better doctor, a better communicator, a better team player, a better friend, validator, etc. Because it's not going to just click that the moment you graduate, it's going to kick in and happen. And I think this is the time. And the issues you were talking about around how we talk to our patients, how we treat them, are we treating them with dignity and respect, as you were saying, Mvumba and Dr. Lautenberg, as well as Dr. Temlin. I mean, I think the way we talk to our patients, sometimes we learn it from the way what we see. Sometimes it's an inherent feature of some humans, but we can always try and help. And that in itself, sometimes we forget that contributes to reduced access to healthcare, in as much as poverty can have an impact on top of all of that. So poverty will impact in terms of cost, affordability, in terms of geographical access, because you're living too far away from the facility, so you end up having to then pay multiple taxi rides, as you were saying, from Barra to Charlotte, without knowing that they have the means. But there's also the acceptability part. So the health system actually has an element that's called responsiveness. And sometimes when I ask students, what do you mean by responsiveness? They say, oh, providing the right care to the right people. No, yeah, that's important, but that's not the responsiveness we're talking about. We're talking about understanding the non-medical expectations of your patients and putting yourself in their shoes. So if I go and see my doctor, do I want to be screamed at? Do I want to be, shouted at? Do I want people to shout out what my condition is and share my file amongst themselves without really, so those kinds of things, once you take a step back and say, if this was me, would I want this to happen to me? What are my expectations when I go to the health sector? And often it's us as the practitioners who make that difference. How we treat our patients will influence whether or not they'll come back. If you say, come back in 2 weeks' time, because I want to check whether your sputum test is positive, for example, so that you can start a TB treatment. So the way you treat the patient on that day may influence whether or not they ever get onto to TB treatment or antiretroviral treatment or any other medication. And that you've lost that person, we've contributed to a poor health outcome in our society. So I know it's not easy. We have long days, calls, all sorts of things going on. But all we're saying is, let's learn some of those things while we're students, understand how those things impact on our patients' health outcomes, and try as much as possible on a day-to-day basis to try and work towards that situation. It's not going to happen overnight or anything, but it's something that I think we can do and is within our control. Yeah.
I just want to pick up on what you were saying about what patients also value, that isn't necessarily monetary. And something that's always stayed with me throughout the time that I've been practicing now is their name. How much people value you when you actually call them by their name. And I think as students, you get told to go clock the incarcerated hernia, the lymphoma, the MDR TB. That's not who they are. And what you can actually do for a person by using their name and saying, sorry, Mr. Buthelezi, may I please ask you about X, Y, and Z? Instead of 4 students arriving to the bed going, are you the MDR TB patient? There's so much more than their disease. And I think it's just to remind you that patients value that and I know, and you're like, I know Ruvumba's laughing because I know we do that. We're like, oh yeah, have you gone and seen that HIPAA in bed 5? We make people their diseases, and there's so much more than that. So I think don't fall into that trap. Like, actually remember who they are and what their actual value is as a human and where they come from, and that call them by their name, as something as simple as that.
I think it's just, I wish we had enough time to just carry on talking about all of this. I don't even have something to say sort of as like a little link. It's really amazing, everything that you've spoken about tonight. I just quickly want to bring up the Menti slide again that we've asked the attendees to interact with so that we can have a look at some of the responses. Hopefully there have been some responses. If not, we can carry on talking. So the first question was, as you can see, what non-biological factors do you think have the greatest effect on health in South Africa? I think so this was the first one, and students, as you can see, have just responded. If there's anything specific that maybe the panelists you can pick up on that you'd like to comment on specifically.
There is one word there that I've written. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. There's one word there, and it's so small in the corner, and it's the thing I've written on my notes about 14 times, is this word stigma. And I think we also deeply forget what the stigma of having a mental illness is like when you face that stigma from your family, from your friends. I'm obviously not going to go and get my treatments if everybody's saying that I'm crazy and I've got a screw loose in my head, or he cries all the time, he's got depression. But it's so much more than that. There's stigma in coming to the hospital as a domestic violence victim, as a survivor. There's stigma coming from that. There's stigma with having HIV and AIDS. There's so much stigma surrounding disease and conditions in our country. And I think we forget that we have a huge role in educating our patients and their family members to improve that stigma. And that's just a word I saw that I just had to say. It's written on my paper a lot today.
I would agree with that. I think it's quite a huge issue, stigma. I mean, we're seeing it play out now with the COVID-19 pandemic. People unwilling to go and get tested, or adhere to isolation, quarantine, or seek care at hospital if they need to, for example. So I mean, we've seen it in other conditions before COVID, so it's not new. I totally agree with you, Doc. One thing I just wanted to make one observation about was one of the things about, I know poverty, I've talked about how it's such a big issue. And I mean, the way one defines it, if one looks at Google, it will say the state of being extremely poor. So, that's one very simple way, but it's actually about, just not having, it's really about not having human needs because you don't have the ability to pay for them. And the human needs are education, access to healthcare, financial independence, and having a job, having transport to get you to a job, to the health system, or to the education system, and so on. So I'm seeing a lot of these issues here being related to poverty. And so that's how poverty plays out in different ways. And so one of the things that's really pervasive, when one of the questions was, is poverty really a contagion? I'd never really thought about it actually until I was invited to this talk. And in a way, one can think of it in that way because of the fact that it just permeates almost every aspect of someone's life if they are in that situation. So it even links to stigma. I mean, it's sort of, back in the day when antiretroviral treatment was quite new, HIV was not as mainstream-ish as it is today. People did not want anyone in their community to know they had HIV. And so they'll get their drugs for a month and then really procrastinate about going back to get the next drugs. And, what if the nurse tells my friend, etc. So people who had the money, so I grew up in Zambia. So this was what was happening in Zambia when I was a medical student. Okay, now I'm betraying my age, but never mind. I was a medical student and a young doctor. So people who had the money would get into their car, drive to the next town to go to the clinic to get antiretroviral. And so again, I'm just trying to sort of draw the parallel between how sometimes poverty and lack of income and lack of education, lack of status in society just links to many of the things that are on this word map, and one just doesn't know which one is more important than the other. All of these things are probably important and drive unequal health outcomes in society. So yeah, really, really nice one. Thanks.
Maybe not the most important one, but the one that I definitely was drawn to was the arrogance. Someone wrote arrogance, and I just think we forget that we teach it, but we forget that the patient is their own expert in themselves, and we don't let patients finish. We don't let them complete sentences. We don't let them explain why they weren't able to make the appointment or the clinic booking or etc. etc. And it's your own arrogance. It's you thinking that you know better than the patient. And yes, you may be the doctor, but they know their lives, and you need to give the patient the freedom to actually express themselves and to just finish what they're trying to say to you, and actually to really listen. And my topic more being on success is that with being good doctors, I think it's difficult. There's a fine line between arrogance and confidence. And yes, you should be a confident practitioner, but there's no need to be arrogant. Your humility is what will bring you success. No one is going to, no one's going to back you up if you are only lauding yourself and blowing your own trumpet. So I think it's a two-pronged approach. I think it's too arrogant to be, to expect that you know better than your patient, but also the fine line between confidence and being arrogant as a healthcare practitioner.
I think my topic was intolerance. And one of the things here that wasn't mentioned is actually xenophobia. I'm a foreign Black female myself, and being in the clinical space, I've been able to observe how foreigners are treated in the South African healthcare system. And my privilege as someone of a certain socioeconomic standing means I'm not always privy to certain treatments because I can access private care. But in the public healthcare system, the way that foreign patients are treated does actually have an effect on their access to health in this country. Firstly, because, for example, they might have to pay, I think it was Charlotte, something close to 4,000 or 5,000 rand to open a file, just to open a file. And then on top of that, just the way that they're generally treated in the hospital because they're not speaking the language. There's comments of you should be getting healthcare in your own country, So I think that's actually something that's maybe not there, that is a real factor in this country, especially when you understand that South Africa is the diaspora of Africa. A lot of countries are coming here, a lot of people are migrating here, and a lot of people are accessing health in South Africa. If you look at like Simja, for example, in Obzangani, almost 50% of the women that deliver there are Zimbabwean, like myself. So there's, the stigma, this xenophobia is such a big thing and has such an impact on how people access their healthcare, because a lot of South Africa actually treats a lot of foreign nationals, yet the way that they're treated is in a way almost to limit their access to the healthcare. That could be argued maybe because of cost reasons, because of policy, but yeah, xenophobia is one of the ones I would have added there.
Remember, something that ties in with what you say, Azul, is that fear that's written there, and the fear of what you expect you're going to receive from the hospital, being a foreigner or having waited too long in the hospital. All of those things tie. Very interesting you mentioned that, because fear popped up, and I think that's a huge thing that foreign patients fear is, I can't speak the same language as you. How do I communicate with you? How do I tell you what's wrong? How do I contact my family? Am I gonna, or can you help me? We don't understand each other in some instances. And I'm just, it's such a frightening experience. I think that must be really tough for our patients.
And one of the major fears that they also have is documents. So a lot of people that you'll speak to, for example, from my country, they'll say, I'm not going to go to the clinic because then they're going to ask me for my documents and I don't have them. Then I'm going to get arrested and I'm going to get deported, So they'd rather sit at home, feeling ill because of this fear that you talk about.
It's a compounding factor, because to be sick is to be in a fearful state. It's already to be scared. It's already to be vulnerable. And now you have this compounding issue that really should be a non-issue, that's making you even more fearful. It ends up that our patients come to us, they seek care too late, often when it's advanced and we can do less for them. And, they're just in not a good place to be able to actually get better and to commit to their own health, because they've waited so long and they've spent so much energy being scared of accessing healthcare.
Perfect. And then the second Menti slide was a question about what interventions you think are important in confronting these non-biological contagions on a societal level. Quite long answers, so I'm not sure if you want me to read any specifically out, or if you can just read them yourselves and also have any comments on them.
So the one that I would like to deal with is the mental health discussions. Encourage working together instead of competing. I think Dr. Latkan was a great example of that this evening. And she spoke about her own experience in ComServe and what she's been through and her own vulnerability. And it made it easier for us to come to the table and say, we've also been there. We've also had those moments where we've been tired and we haven't spoken to students, to patients, to people around us with the respect that they deserve, or how we usually would have. That we've all experienced burnout to some degree or another. And some people even flame out, where something has happened that has shaken their confidence so much that they don't actually come back to medicine. They take a break and it's been something that's so severe, their confidence can't actually recover. And I think we cannot afford, we're losing doctors to so many things, to COVID now, to, for many years, to the international industry. We cannot afford to lose our doctors to flame out, where they're leaving, they're going to corporate, and they're just too afraid to actually come back into this space. So I think this kind of conversation where you actually just say, you know what, we're human. We feel like you do, we get sad, we feel helpless, we feel like poverty is a huge thing that we also don't know how to deal with. And it's not only you that feels that way. I think that is a huge thing that we should start doing. And that's where the success part of what I was feeling came in, is that this is unusual what we have done in medicine. If you think about something like the army, for example, no man gets left behind. You don't push a fellow soldier in front of a bullet to save yourself. You go out and you get that person off the battlefield, whatever it takes. And we have somehow lost that we are actually a team. We are actually an army unit. We have a sniper in the surgeon, you know, we have recruiters in the radiologists to go out and source the information and show us what we're dealing with. And if you look at it like that, why are we sacrificing each other when we should be no man left behind? No man left behind at 1 o'clock in the morning trying to drip a peds baby by themselves and feeling like they're alone and isolated. And like, why have we done that, and why have we kept saying that that's okay? So I think we need to change our mindset, and we need to actually just realize that medicine is not a one-man sport. It's not an individual competition. It is a team dynamic. And I think the most important thing I can say through this is that if you want to be successful, if you want to have good patient outcomes, if you want to be good doctors, you need to start now in working in your team, because it takes a village to get a patient through the system and back to full health. And if you think that you can do it alone, you're going to be really shocked and disappointed.
Can't see the ones on the right. Okay, let me just get rid of it. Just a couple of ones sort of stand out a little bit. I mean, the one on the right about practical resources made available where people feel personally assisted and ways to hold yourself and others accountable. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, I think if I understand that one correctly, it's sort of the idea of linking people to resources that are available is often one of one of the ways of uplifting people without them feeling like they're getting handouts, because people sometimes do have a sense of dignity. So one of the things that's often quite useful is in whichever community we're working in, you know, early on when we're talking about what can one do, there are lots of organizations and resources available that can facilitate helping people either get a skill or a job or information and so on. And so having those resources available and linking people to those resources is also giving them a sense that they are taking a step to try and help themselves. And so that's one of the ones that I saw there. There's one here about combating the remnants of apartheid is achievable. I mean, I think it's interesting, this point that you brought, because it's one of the things that came to mind when I was reflecting on that question about what can be done, what interventions do we know can help. So I was thinking of access to healthcare, for example. I think the building more facilities, you might not believe it, but a lot has been done. Thousands of facilities have been built over the last 20 years in areas that are less privileged. And I mean, a few years ago, we did a study in Gauteng, and we found, you know, the proportion of people who don't have access to, do not live within 5 kilometers of a facility where they can get some care, and then maybe be referred on to the next level of care, like a hospital perhaps, was not as big as we thought. So it's certainly reduced, and there were only a few pockets where we felt that, you know, they needed to probably build a few more clinics or have some outreach services or mobile services to go there. So the big issues that are still remaining, if you think about access, I was talking earlier about the 3 dimensions. There's availability. So on the availability front, the facilities are there. But I think the challenges are getting health workers to work there for various reasons. You know, we don't have enough health workers, and the ones that are there might not be willing to go to some places, but others, or they're just not enough of them to distribute equitably, etc. So availability is being worked on. And the 2 areas, affordability and acceptability, are the areas that are really still kind of difficult. And people who do research on access to healthcare and use income levels as a way of measuring poverty have found that people at the lowest income bracket often spend a bigger proportion of their monthly income on seeking healthcare because of transport costs, or because of wanting to go to see a private doctor because going to the public sector hospital is going to take too long, waiting in a queue, and blah, 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 blah. And so that's an acceptability issue. So those are the two outstanding ones, and I think it's good that you raised that. And so there are ways in which the health system needs to find a way of getting people to facilities. Is it giving them free money for transport? Is it giving them free transport? I mean, there are different views about that and whether that's a good way of doing it. But I do know a couple of African countries where they've had a scheme where they use what's that thing called, e-wallet concept, like e-wallet. So taxi drivers get a voucher for certain patients who the health system wants to transport to another hospital. So they use new technology to try and pay the taxi driver for somebody's fare. And it's all done through cell phone technology, etc. So I mean, that's something that works quite well, and I think it's something worth learning from. But there are things indeed the health system can do to try and improve transportation and so on. Yeah.
I think something also, we often tend to focus on the negative. We forget about things that are being done to try and improve the situation. When I applied for internship in ComServe versus how it's being run and orchestrated now, is they're changing the way that final year students can put their choices in to specifically facilitate people moving further into more rural areas, working in clinics, having the ability to place a doctor in these further away, perhaps undesirable regions, if you can call it that, because some people don't want to work there. But by changing the way that students are applying for internship and community service, we're also changing this metropolitan Cape Town, Joburg, Pretoria, the like Addington Hospital in Durban. We're changing those from being the only places that people want to go to now saying you've got to put a metropolitan area, a clinic, a district, so that we can supply doctors to these clinics and facilities that have been built that haven't previously been supplied. And I think that's, there's many different points of views and arguments on this, but I think that's an amazing thing, because we're starting to change the way that doctors are placed in hospitals and clinics, allowing for some clinics who've only ever been run by nurses to actually have a community service doctor who can work and help supply the community for a year. And I think that's an incredible change that's happened over the last couple of trying to better our patients' ability to have access to healthcare.
I just wanted to pick up on what you said there about how they have changed the internship and community service placement. And earlier, was it the end of last year? I think when they were really struggling with the amount of funding that would be needed for your internship years and to pay for community service, and where the government was actually saying where could they cut costs while still having ComServe doctors available, but not actually paying the ComServe doctor's salary for a whole additional year. And, in a way, maybe that's also an appealing discussion to have, is a whole year of ComService necessary from each doctor? Or would you be better off taking a doctor for 3 months and putting them in those severely underprivileged communities? And that even if you go out and you work in private, or you're busy starting your reg time, or you're working as a medical officer, etc., in your own field, that those 3 months of community service time will be intense and you'll be moved to those outlying areas. But it is a short period of time. You have doctors who are energized, who are not being beaten down by the system by being there for a year, away from their families, away from their resources, their loved ones, etc. And you get to maybe choose. You can go in a group of 3 or 4 people that that you work well with, and you make a real difference. And I think you'll start seeing those same doctors will be more keen to go back years later when they're consultants and help those same communities, instead of just being trapped in that situation for a year. And actually feeling isolated and alone. Rather, we make it something that is something you become passionate about, and a community that you build a relationship with. And maybe that's a different way of looking at things. So I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. We're going through speed bumps and hurdles and ways of learning about it, but we are changing, and we are being open to changing and looking at things in a different way.
Okay, perfect. If there's nothing further that any of you would like to comment on the slide, this is just the same slide from the start. Then I think that's going to bring our discussion to a close. Unfortunately, I wish we could talk the rest of the evening about all of this. I think we hardly touched on some very, very important topics, but hopefully we are going to extend, well, not hopefully, I know we are going to extend this throughout the year to the rest of our events, but hopefully, doctors, we get to hear from you again the rest of the year. So yeah, just on behalf of SurgSuck, I would like to extend a big thank you for joining us this evening, and for all the input that you've had, all the amazing words of wisdom that you've given us. I think it's a lot to think about. And it's very nice to know that there is things as students that we can do, and to know that change does start today, and it does start with us. And it's very much, I think, a butterfly effect that then extends to all the people around us. And it's something that we don't always get to see immediately, but if we change ourselves, we can, I think, change the world, which is, I think, a lot of our very big dreams. So I would just like to extend thank you to everyone who has attended and participated in this launch event. I think it's been a big success, and we are definitely looking forward to a successful year. It's been the best way to kick it off. So thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us. I think we really enjoyed it. It's nice to be able to feel like we also have value, and we can also give back, and you find us useful and not just crotchety and on the wards and telling you to go clock a HEPA. So thank you for having us.
Perfect. If you wouldn't mind just going back to the other slide. I also just want to give a quick thank you to everyone who's also attended, but to also our main sponsors, which are Medtronic and Life Healthcare, because without their continued support, SurgSuck would not be able to host or organize any of these events and the workshops that we continue to host, hopefully this year. We're continuously grateful. We also would like to thank our sponsors, not our sponsors, our partners, the Smile Foundation and Surgeons for Little Lives. And we're looking forward to a very exciting year of working together in the near future. And finally, our newest sponsor, which is Red Bull, who has just recently come on board with us. And as promised, I think Henri is going to quickly do a draw.
Right. So just now, I did a random number generator on Google, and the number that came up was number 32, and the name that corresponds with that number is Alexia Ray Wilton. So Alexia, if you're here and you want to turn on your mic, you're welcome to, but you are the lucky recipient of a complimentary case of Red Bull. So yay! I can see you put up your hand. If you want to.
Hi, sorry.
Hi.
Sorry, just figuring out how to use this. Oh, thank you so much. That's incredibly kind. And wow, I'm never this lucky. So that's really great. Thank you so much. It's been a really amazing launch event, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm very, very glad you enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll be in touch with you to hand over your case of Red Bull. And so yeah, many thanks to Red Bull for sponsoring us, and a special shout out to the Wits ambassador for Red Bull, Filani. Thank you so much. And we'll do the handover as soon as possible, hopefully within this week. So yay, congratulations.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. So thank you again, everybody. Don't forget to check out our new website and also our social media for updates on the upcoming events. Our next one should be the annual burnout panel. So that is the contagion of mental health in early April. From all of us at SurgSoc, have a lovely evening. Doctors, Ruby, thank you so much for joining us again. We're incredibly grateful to be able to hear from you on this online platform. So that's it from us. I hope everyone has a good evening and a good week.